What are some of the challenges for achieving deep decarbonization? This shows what the lifetimes are of different equipment in our energy system. Incandescent light bulbs, well, you change them pretty often, but other things in the system you don't change very often. How will you incorporate the fact that the lifetimes of energy equipment are very long in your current purchasing decisions? You need to do that in order to make the right decision now for where you want to be in 2050. How do you drive rapid consumer adoption? Buildings become highly electrified. What this slide shows, if you look at the blue, is electricity use as a portion of all the energy that's used in buildings for heating, cooling, lighting, cooking, and so forth. And you can see that in residential buildings, shown here, it becomes more than 95% of in use. The question for would-be policymakers is, how do you go about achieving that? I referred earlier to the fork in the road related to whether you have battery electric vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, and the challenge that poses to electric utilities. How do you go about coordinating between sectors like transportation and electricity that typically don't have much communication? They are not in the same line of business. But as deep decarbonization proceeds, because the three pillars interact with each other so strongly, they need to communicate and coordinate in the future. How do you design wholesale markets for decarbonized electricity? This shows a week in March of 2050 in the western part of the United States. And on the upper bar, what you see is electricity generation. The bright yellow thumbprint that you see is from solar. There's a great deal of solar in that system. What that means is you have a need to take up this renewable energy, which is intermittent. The sun's going to shine when it's going to shine. There's going to be more than your typical demand requires at that period of time. What this shows on the bottom row is that by 2050, you actually need to make your energy demand more flexible. And one way to do that is use that excess solar or wind generation to produce hydrogen or synthetic natural gas or other renewable fuels that you can make from electricity. You need coordination between the supply and the demand side of the electricity system. That means we need wholesale markets in electricity that are designed very differently from the way they are today. How do we achieve a sustainable business model for utilities? Some people think that utilities are about to be obsolete, that we will only have our power systems on top of our roofs. In fact, our analysis shows that probably the energy that we use in a decarbonized system in 2050 is going to tend to be dominated by networked supply, meaning it comes in through a grid or through a pipeline. We need a business model that will allow these network providers to stay in business. How do you drive a sea change in energy investment flows? That is, we know that we're going to need to spend a great deal more on low carbon equipment and infrastructure, from electric vehicles to clean power plants. At the same time, we're saving money from not purchasing fossil fuels. But this is a big shift in investor thinking about where they should be pouring their money. Worldwide, we're talking about potentially trillions, maybe tens of trillions of dollars to achieve deep decarbonization around the world. What drives that? A more prosaic question here in the United States is, how should governments respond to declining fossil fuel tax revenues? Governments depend a lot on the fossil fuel system by taxing them and using those for other purposes, such as building highways, for example. If those fossil fuel tax revenues go away, then we need to have other ways of providing those. A final point is, how do we address the distributional effects of a low carbon transition? As I've said, the net cost to households of this low carbon transition will be quite low. Into the economy as a whole will be quite low. And as a matter of fact, there are going to be whole new industries that get developed to produce the low carbon equipment and infrastructure that we need. However, that means that some of the older industries that produce less efficient equipment or are more focused on fossil fuel production are going to need to make a transition. And in order to achieve high social acceptability, certainly here in the United States, but also in other parts of the world as well, even those with different political systems, they all have the question facing them of how do we go about doing a just transition? And I think this is one of our large challenges. Our work, I believe, has demonstrated that we know technologically how we can achieve deep decarbonization, and that the real challenge is, contrary to some who throw up their hands and say we need a miracle, we can't do it. It's not that. We don't need a miracle. What we need is really sustained transition. And those questions have more to do with institutions, with attitudes among both policymakers and the public, with our sense of understanding and belief that we can actually accomplish that. My own discovery has been that when you show people tangibly and concretely what the deep decarbonization transformation requires, that they end up feeling very hopeful. This is something that we can do, and we need to capitalize on that hope in order to put the policies in place, to develop the political will, to do the things that we need to do as citizens, consumers, and so forth to support and drive this transformation.